They called me the Echo Boy, and they thought it was funny. They would gather me in the parlor after dinner, have me perform for their guests, make me imitate the sounds of animals and machines and people, while they laughed and clapped and marveled at the talented little Negro boy who could mimic anything he heard. "Do the rooster," they would shout, and I would crow exactly like the rooster in the yard, capturing not just the sound, but the rhythm, the cadence, the personality of that particular bird. "Do, Master Thornton," they would demand, and I would speak in Master Thornton's voice, his exact tone, his precise inflection, music his distinctive way of drawing out certain words, saying things that made them laugh, while Master Thornton himself sat there smiling, amused by this slave child, who could sound exactly like him. They thought it was harmless entertainment, a parlor trick, a curiosity that made their plantation seem more interesting and sophisticated. They had no idea that the talent they found so amusing would eventually become the weapon I would use to destroy their sense of security, to create chaos that would enable escape, to prove that even the most powerless person can strike back if they're clever enough and patient enough and willing to use whatever gifts they possess. My name is Finn, and this is the story of how I used my voice, my ability to perfectly mimic any sound I heard to orchestrate one of the most audacious escapes in Florida history. This is the story of how a 14-year-old slave boy with an unusual talent created a phantom hunt that drew away all the armed men from 2 plantations, allowing my sister and a dozen others to escape to freedom while their captives chased echoes through the swamps. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, at the moment when I first discovered that I could do something extraordinary, something that would eventually save lives and create a legend that people still talk about in whispered tones. I was born in 1843 on the Thornton Sugar Plantation in northern Florida, the son of a field, and named Sarah, and a father I never knew. My mother said I was different from the moment I could make sounds, that I didn't just cry like other babies, but that I would mimic the sounds around me, would echo back the voices I heard, would reproduce the songs of birds and the barking of dogs with uncanny accuracy. "You're special, Finn," my mother told me when I was old enough to understand. "You have a gift, but you need to be careful with it. Gifts can be dangerous for people like us. They can make you valuable, which means you're more likely to be sold. Or they can make you threatening, which means you're more likely to be punished. So use your gift carefully, baby. Use it wisely." I didn't fully understand what she meant then. I was just a child, fascinated by sounds, by the way voices worked, by the mechanics of creating noise. I would spend hours listening to people talk, studying the way they formed words, the way their voices rose and fell, the subtle differences that made each person's voice unique. And I discovered that I could reproduce those voices perfectly. Not just approximately, not just close enough to fool someone who wasn't paying attention, but exactly, capturing every nuance, every inflection, every subtle characteristic that made a voice distinctive. By the time I was 8 years old, I could imitate anyone on the plantation so perfectly that people couldn't tell the difference. I could sound like Master Thornton, like his wife, like the overseers, like the other slaves. I could reproduce the sounds of animals, horses, dogs, chickens, pigs, so accurately that the animals themselves would respond, thinking they were hearing one of their own kind. And I could create sounds that didn't exist in nature. Mechanical noises, musical instruments, the crack of a whip, the sound of breaking glass. If I heard it once, I could reproduce it perfectly, could store it in my memory, and recall it whenever I needed it. Master Thornton discovered my talent when I was 9 years old. He'd been arguing with his wife in the parlor, and I'd been hiding nearby, listening, memorizing their voices. Later that day, when I was alone in the yard, I practiced imitating their argument, reproducing their voices and their words with perfect accuracy. Unfortunately, Master Thornton heard me. He came around the corner of the house and found me standing there, speaking in his voice and his wife's voice, recreating their private argument for my own amusement. I thought I was going to be whipped. I thought I'd crossed a line, had done something that would be seen as mockery or insolence. But instead, Master Thornton laughed. "That's extraordinary," he said, studying me with new interest. "You sound exactly like us, exactly. How do you do that?" "I don't know, Master," I said. "Honestly, I hear sounds and I can make them. I've always been able to do it." "Show me," Master Thornton commanded. "Imitate me. Say something in my voice." I hesitated, then spoke in his voice. "That's extraordinary. You sound exactly like us." I captured not just his words, but his tone, his inflection, the slight rasp in his voice that came from years of smoking cigars. Master Thornton's eyes widened. "My God, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect." He called for his wife, for overseers, for the other house slaves. "Come see this. Come see what this boy can do." And that's how I became the Echo Boy, the entertainment, the curiosity that Master Thornton would show off to visitors. He would have me perform at dinner parties, would make me imitate his guests, would laugh as I reproduce the sounds of animals and machines and people with perfect accuracy. "He's like a parrot," one guest said, "but better, more versatile. You could make money with him, Thornton. Take him to fairs, charge people to hear him perform." "Perhaps," Master Thornton said, "but for now he's my private entertainment, my little Echo Boy." I hated it, hated being made to perform, hated being treated like a trained animal, hated the way they laughed and pointed and marveled at me as if I were a curiosity rather than a person. But I also understood that my talent gave me a kind of protection, made me valuable in a way that field hands weren't, gave me access to the big house and to information that other slaves never heard. And I began to understand that my talent could be more than just entertainment. It could be a weapon, a tool, a way of creating confusion and chaos that could be used to resist, to sabotage, to strike back against the system that enslaved us. I started small, testing the limits of what I could do. I would imitate the overseer's voice, calling slaves to different tasks, creating confusion about who was supposed to be where. I would reproduce the sound of a dinner bell hours before mealtime, causing people to gather and then disperse in confusion. I would mimic the sound of breaking glass or falling objects, making people think accidents had happened when nothing had actually broken. These were small acts of resistance, minor sabotages that caused inconvenience rather than real harm. Clear's throat, but they taught me something important. That my voice could create reality, could make people believe things that weren't true, could manipulate their perceptions and their actions. And I began to think about larger possibilities about how my talent could be used not just for minor pranks, but for something more significant. Something that could actually help people escape, that could strike a real blow against the plantation system. I just needed the right opportunity, the right motivation, the right moment when the stakes were high enough to justify taking a real risk. That moment came in the summer of 1857, when I was 14 years old, and my sister Lily was sold away from the Thornton plantation to a neighboring property owned by a man named Master Harrison. Lily was 18, beautiful and strong, and Master Thornton had decided she was too valuable to keep. He could get music a good price for her, could use the money to pay off debts and invest in new equipment. So he sold her, separated us, tore apart the only family I had left after our mother had died 2 years earlier. "I'm sorry, Finn," Lily said the night before she was taken away, holding me while I cried. "I'm so sorry, but we'll find each other again somehow, some way we'll be together again. I promise." "How?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How can we be together when you'll be on a different plantation? When we'll never see each other when they've torn us apart?" "I don't know," Lily admitted, "but I believe it. I have to believe it. Because if I don't, if I accept that this is forever, then I'll have nothing left to hope for." I watched them take her away the next morning, watched the wagon carry her down the road toward the Harrison plantation, 5 miles away, and I made a decision. I would get her back. I would use my talent, my voice, my ability to create sounds and manipulate perceptions to orchestrate an escape that would free Lily and anyone else who wanted to run. I didn't know exactly how I would do it yet, but I knew that my voice was a weapon, and I was finally ready to use it for something more than entertainment. The Echo Boy was about to become something else, something dangerous, something powerful, something that would create a legend that people would talk about for generations. I spent the next 3 months preparing, observing, learning everything I could about the plantation's routines, about the overseer's habits, about the security measures that kept enslaved people from escaping. And I began using my voice more deliberately, more strategically, testing what I could accomplish through sound alone. The first real test came in August when I decided to create confusion during the morning work assignments. I hid near the fields and used Master Thornton's voice to give contradictory orders to the overseers. "Morrison," I called out in Master Thornton's exact voice, capturing his tone and his manner of speaking. "Take your crew to the North Field today. We need to finish the harvest there before the rains come." Samuel Morrison, the head overseer, heard the command and nodded, beginning to organize his crew to head north. But then, from a different location, I called out again in Master Thornton's voice. "Morrison, what are you doing? I told you to work the South Field today. The North Field can wait." Morrison looked confused, turned toward where he thought the voice was coming from. "But, Master, you just said," I said, "the South Field." I interrupted, still using Master Thornton's voice, adding a note of irritation that I'd heard him use when he was frustrated. "Are you deaf, Morrison, or just stupid?" "Southfield." Now Morrison, flustered and uncertain, redirected his crew toward the Southfield. But then I called out again, this time from yet another location. "Morrison, Northfield. I don't know what's wrong with you today, but follow my orders." The confusion was beautiful. Morrison didn't know which command to follow, didn't know where Master Thornton actually was, didn't know if he was hearing the real master or if something strange was happening. Other overseers heard the contradictory commands and became confused as well, unsure of their assignments, uncertain about what they were supposed to be doing. The morning's work was delayed by nearly 2 hours, while everyone tried to figure out what was happening. While Master Thornton, the real one, emerged from the house and tried to sort out the confusion, while the overseers argued about who had heard what and where the commands had come from. "I swear I heard you, Master," Morrison insisted. "I heard your voice clear as day telling me to go to the North Field. I was in my study," Master Thornton said, irritated. "I didn't give any commands this morning. You must have been mistaken." "But I heard you," Morrison repeated. "I know your voice, Master. I've worked for you for 10 years. I know what you sound like." Master Thornton had no explanation for what had happened. He dismissed it as confusion, as Morrison, mishearing something, as a strange acoustic phenomenon that had made some other sound seem like his voice. He never suspected that a 14-year-old slave boy was responsible, that I'd been hiding in various locations around the plantation, using his voice to create chaos. I was more careful after that, spacing out my interventions, making sure not to create so much confusion that people would start looking for an explanation beyond simple mistakes or acoustic anomalies. But I continued to use my voice strategically, creating small disruptions that made the plantation less efficient, that frustrated the overseers, that gave the enslaved people small moments of relief from their constant labor. I would imitate the sound of the dinner bell, causing people to stop work and head toward the dining area, only to discover it wasn't actually meal time. I would reproduce the sound of a rattlesnake, causing horses to panic and throw their riders. I would mimic the sound of breaking equipment, making overseers think that tools had been damaged when they were actually fine. These were acts of resistance, small sabotages that didn't directly free anyone, but that made the plantation system less smooth, less efficient, less absolute in its control. And they taught me valuable lessons about timing, about positioning, about how to use sound to manipulate people's perceptions and actions. But I was also planning something bigger, something more ambitious. Because my goal wasn't just to create minor inconveniences. It was to free Lily, to get her away from the Harrison plantation and help her escape to freedom. I began studying the slave catchers who operated in the area, particularly a man named Silas Crow, who led a group of professional hunters who tracked down fugitive slaves and returned them to their masters for bounties. Silas and his men were feared throughout northern Florida, known for their skill at tracking, their brutality toward captured fugitives, their use of dogs and guns to hunt human beings like animals. But I realized that Silas and his men could be useful to me, not as allies, but as tools, as elements in a larger plan that would use their own methods against them. I began following Silas when he came to the area, listening to his voice, memorizing his speech patterns, studying the way he gave commands to his men. I would hide in the woods near where they camped, would listen to their conversations, would absorb every detail of how they sounded, how they communicated, how they organized their hunts, and I practiced imitating them. I would go deep into the swamps where no one could hear me, and I would reproduce Silas's voice, his commands, his way of speaking. I would mimic the voices of his men, would practice creating the sounds of their hunts, the barking of dogs, the sound of gunshots, the shouts and calls they used to coordinate their searches. I spent weeks perfecting these imitations, making sure I could reproduce not just the voices, but the entire soundscape of a slave hunt, the chaos, the urgency, the fear and excitement that characterized these brutal pursuits. And slowly, a plan began to form in my mind, a plan so audacious, so risky, so dependent on perfect timing and execution that it seemed almost impossible. But I'd learned that impossible things could be accomplished if you were clever enough, patient enough, willing to use whatever advantages you possessed. I was going to create a phantom hunt. I was going to use my voice to make the overseers and slave catchers believe that a mass escape was happening, that fugitives were running through the woods, that they needed to mobilize immediately to catch them. And while they were chasing echoes, while they were pursuing sounds that I created, I would slip into the Harrison plantation, free Lily and anyone else who wanted to run, and lead them to safety while our captives were distracted by the ghost hunt I'd orchestrated. It was insane, it was dangerous, it was likely to fail, but it was also the best chance Lily and I would ever have to be together again, to escape the system that had enslaved us, to claim the freedom that we'd been denied our entire lives. I just needed to wait for the right moment, the right conditions, the right night when everything would come together perfectly. That moment came in October 1857, on a night when fog rolled in from the coast, creating the perfect conditions for acoustic confusion, for sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, for a phantom hunt that would seem real enough to draw away every armed man from both plantations. The Echo Boy was about to orchestrate his masterpiece, and nothing would ever be the same again. The fog came in thick on the evening of October 23rd, 1857, rolling across the Florida landscape like a living thing, reducing visibility to just a few yards, creating an atmosphere of mystery and confusion that was perfect for what I was planning. I'd been preparing for this night for months, had studied every detail, had practiced every sound, had mapped out every movement I would need to make, and now, finally, the conditions were right. The fog would help carry sound in strange ways, would make it difficult to pinpoint where noises were coming from, would create the perfect environment for the phantom hunt I was about to orchestrate. I'd spent the previous week making final preparations, gathering supplies, confirming the route we would take once Lily and the others were free. I'd made contact with a conductor on the Underground Railroad, a free black man named Marcus, who operated a safe house about 15 miles north of the plantations. He'd agreed to help, had promised to be ready to receive fugitives on the night I specified. "This is the craziest plan I've ever heard," Marcus had told me when I'd explained what I was going to do. "You're going to use your voice to create a fake slave hunt, draw away all the armed men, and then just walk into the Harrison plantation and free your sister." "That's insane, boy. That's suicide." "It's the only chance we have," I'd said, "and it'll work. I know it will. I've been practicing for months. I can create sounds that will make them believe there's a real hunt happening. That fugitives are running through the woods. They'll chase the sounds, and while they're chasing, we'll run in the opposite direction. And if they catch you," Marcus had asked, "if they figure out what you're doing, they'll kill you, Finn. They'll make an example of you. Then I'll die trying to free my sister," I'd said simply. "That's better than living the rest of my life knowing I didn't even try." Marcus had studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the craziest. Maybe both. All right, I'll be ready. You get them to my safe house and I'll take them from there. But be careful, boy. Be very, very careful." Now, standing in the fog on the night I'd been planning for, I felt a mixture of terror and excitement. Everything I'd been working toward, everything I'd been preparing for was about to happen, and it would either work perfectly or fail catastrophically, with no middle ground. I'd positioned myself in the woods between the Thornton and Harrison plantations, in a location where sound would carry to both properties, where I could create the illusion of a hunt happening nearby, where the overseers and slave catchers would hear what I wanted them to hear. I'd studied the timing carefully. I knew that Silas Crow and his men were camped about a mile away, that they'd been hired by several plantation owners to patrol the area and watch for fugitives. I knew that the overseers on both plantations would be alert, would be listening for any signs of trouble, would be ready to respond immediately if they heard sounds of a slave hunt. And I was about to give them exactly what they were listening for. I started with Silas's voice calling out through the fog with perfect accuracy. "There I see them, fugitives heading north, at least a dozen of them. Get the dogs, move, move, move." The sound carried through the fog, reaching both plantations, reaching Silas's actual camp. And immediately I heard responses. Men shouting, dogs barking, the sounds of people mobilizing, preparing to join the hunt. I moved quickly to a different location about 50 yards away and called out again, this time in the voice of one of Silas's men. "They're splitting up, some heading east toward the river. We need more men. Someone get Master Thornton, get Master Harrison. We need everyone. More responses, more sounds of mobilization. I could hear men running. Could hear horses being saddled, could hear the plantation overseers organizing their people to join the hunt. Music, I moved again, creating a pattern of sounds that suggested a large group of fugitives moving through the woods, being pursued by hunters, splitting up and regrouping, creating chaos and confusion. I reproduced the sound of gunshots, not real guns, but perfect imitations that sounded exactly like rifles being fired. I created the sound of dogs baying, of men shouting coordinates, of branches breaking as people ran through the underbrush, and the response was exactly what I'd hoped for. Men from both plantations, along with Silas and his hunters, converged on the area where they thought the hunt was happening. They brought guns, dogs, torches, everything they needed to track down and capture fugitives. But there were no fugitives. There was only me moving through the fog, creating sounds from different locations, making them believe they were hearing a real hunt when they were actually chasing echoes. I heard them over here. Someone shouted, "No, they're this way." Another voice called, "The dogs have a scent. Follow the dogs." But the dogs were following sounds I was creating, were being led in circles, were chasing a phantom trail that existed only in the acoustic landscape I was constructing. I kept it up for 30 minutes, moving constantly, creating sounds from different locations, maintaining the illusion of a large-scale hunt happening in the woods. And all the while I was drawing the armed men deeper into the forest, farther from the plantations, more focused on the phantom fugitives they thought they were pursuing. Finally, when I was certain that every armed man from both plantations was deep in the woods, chasing sounds and shadows, I stopped. I went silent, let the fog swallow the sounds, let the confusion and frustration build as the hunters realized they couldn't find what they were looking for. And then I ran, not deeper into the woods, but back toward the plantations, toward the Harrison property where Lily was being held, toward the opportunity I'd created through sound and misdirection. The plantations were virtually unguarded. All the overseers, all the armed men, all the people who would normally prevent escapes, they were all in the woods chasing phantoms, pursuing echoes that I'd created. It was time for the real escape to begin. The Harrison plantation was eerily quiet when I approached it through the fog. The big house was dark, except for a few lamps in the windows, and the slave quarters were silent, with people huddled inside, probably frightened by the sounds of the hunt they'd heard in the distance. I moved quickly to the quarters, found the cabin where Lily was housed. I knocked softly on the door using a pattern we'd agreed on years ago. 3 quick knocks, a pause, 2 more knocks. It was our secret signal, a way of identifying myself without speaking. The door opened a crack, and Lily's face appeared, her eyes wide with shock and hope. "Finn, is that really you? What are you doing here? What's happening? We heard gunshots, heard men shouting about fugitives." "It's me," I whispered, "and those sounds, I made them. I used my voice to create a fake hunt to draw away all the armed men. They're all in the woods right now, chasing sounds that don't exist. We have maybe an hour before they realize it was a trick and come back." "We need to run now?" Lily stared at me, trying to process what I was saying. You created those sounds? You made them think there was a hunt happening?" "Yes," I said. "I've been planning this for months. I can imitate any sound I hear, and I used it to create a phantom hunt that drew away everyone who could stop us. But we don't have much time. Get anyone who wants to run. We're leaving tonight." Lily moved quickly, waking the other people in her cabin, spreading the word to neighboring cabins. Within minutes, a group had assembled. 12 people total, including Lily, ranging in age from a 10-year-old boy named Samuel to an elderly woman named Martha, who was determined to die free, even if she couldn't run far. "Can you really get us out?" a young man named Jacob asked me, his voice filled with hope and fear. "Can you really get us to freedom? I can get you away from here," I said. "I have a contact with the Underground Railroad, a safe house about 15 miles north. If we can reach it before they catch us, we'll have a chance. But we need to move now, and we need to move quietly. No talking, no noise. Just follow me and trust that I know what I'm doing." We moved out of quarters, heading north, away from the woods where the phantom hunt was still happening, away from the plantations toward freedom. The fog helped conceal us, made it difficult for anyone to see more than a few yards, gave us cover as we moved across open ground. But I knew the fog wouldn't last forever, knew that eventually the hunters would realize they'd been tricked, would return to the plantations and discover that people were missing. We needed to put as much distance as possible between ourselves and our former captives before that happened. We'd been running for about 20 minutes when I heard the first sounds of pursuit. Distant shouts, the baying of dogs, the realization dawning on our captives that they'd been deceived. "They know," Lily said, hearing the same sounds. "They figured it out. They're coming after us." "Keep running," I said, "and we have a head start. We can make it." But the sounds of pursuit were getting closer. The dogs had picked up our scent, were following our trail, were closing the distance faster than we could run. And I realized that we needed another diversion, another use of my voice to create confusion and buy us more time. "Keep going," I told the group. "Head straight north, don't stop, don't look back. I'll catch up." "What are you doing?" Lily asked, grabbing my arm. Finn, don't. I'm going to slow them down, I said. I'm going to use my voice to create confusion, to make them think we're going in a different direction. Trust me, I'll catch up. Just run. I waited until the group had moved ahead. Then I began creating sounds again. But this time, instead of creating the sounds of a hunt, I created the sounds of fugitives. People running through the underbrush, branches breaking, voices calling to each other in panic. And I created these sounds to the east, away from the direction our group was actually traveling, music making the pursuers think we'd turned, that we were heading toward the river instead of north toward the safe house. They're going east. I heard someone shout in the distance. The dogs have the scent. They're heading for the river. The sounds of pursuit shifted, moving east, following the false trail I'd created, and I ran north, following the path our group had taken, using my knowledge of the terrain to move quickly through the fog. I caught up with the group about 10 minutes later, found them huddled in a small clearing, waiting for me, terrified that I'd been caught. Did it work? Lily asked. It worked, I said, breathing hard from the run. They're heading east, chasing sounds I created. We have maybe another 30 minutes before they realize it's another trick. We need to use that time to get as far as possible. We ran for another hour, pushing ourselves to the limit, ignoring exhaustion and fear, driven by the knowledge that capture meant death or worse. The fog began to lift as dawn approached, making us more visible, more vulnerable, but we were also getting close to the safe house, close to the point where Marcus would take over, where we would transition from fugitives to passengers on the Underground Railroad. We reached the safe house just as the sun was rising, found Marcus waiting for us as promised, ready to hide us and help us continue our journey north. You did it, Marcus said, looking at me with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. You actually did it. You used your voice to create a phantom hunt, freed your sister and 11 others and got them all here safely. That's extraordinary, boy. That's the most audacious escape I've ever heard of. We're not safe yet, I said. They'll be looking for us. They'll search every house, every hiding place. We need to keep moving. I know, Marcus said. I have a plan. We'll split you into smaller groups, send you along different routes, make it harder for them to track all of you. You'll be in Canada within a month. I promise you'll be free. We rested for a few hours, ate the food Marcus provided, prepared for the next leg of our journey, and as I sat there exhausted but triumphant, with Lily beside me and 11 other people who'd trusted me enough to run, I felt something I'd never felt before, pride, not just in what I'd accomplished, but in what I'd proven, that even a 14-year-old slave boy with nothing but an unusual talent could strike back against the system that enslaved him, could free people, could create change. The Phantom Hunt had worked. The Echo Boy had become something more than entertainment, more than a curiosity. He'd become a liberator, a trickster, a legend that would be told and retold for generations. The journey north took 3 weeks, traveling mostly at night, hiding during the day, moving through the network of safe houses that made up the Underground Railroad. We split into smaller groups, as Marcus had suggested, with Lily and I traveling together along with 2 others, while the rest took different routes. The pursuit was intense at first. Slave catchers scoured the area, searched every hiding place, questioned everyone they encountered. But they were looking for a large group, expecting to find 12 fugitives traveling together. They never suspected that we'd split up, that we were moving along different routes, that the Phantom Hunt had been just the first of many deceptions, and they never figured out how the Phantom Hunt had been created. They knew they'd been tricked, knew that someone had used sounds to draw them into the woods while the real escape happened elsewhere, but they couldn't understand how it had been done, couldn't imagine that a 14-year-old slave boy had the ability to perfectly mimic voices and sounds to create an entire acoustic landscape that had fooled experienced hunters and overseers. The story of the Phantom Hunt spread quickly, becoming a legend, a cautionary tale, a mystery that people tried to explain, but never fully understood. Some said it was swamp spirits, that the Florida wetlands were haunted by ghosts who helped fugitive slaves escape. Others said it was voodoo magic, that someone had used African sorcery to create illusions and confusion. Still others said it was a coordinated effort by abolitionists, that white people from the north had come south to help slaves escape. But no one suspected the truth. That one boy with an extraordinary talent had orchestrated the entire thing, had used his voice as a weapon, had created sounds that had drawn away every armed man from 2 plantations while his sister and 11 others walked to freedom. The Phantom Hunt of Harrison County, and the newspapers called it the mystery of the vanishing slaves. Ghost sounds of the Florida swamps. The legend grew with each retelling, became more elaborate, more supernatural, more impossible. And I was glad, because the more impossible it seemed, the less likely anyone would suspect that a simple slave boy had been responsible, the safer Lily and I, and others would be. We reached Canada in November 1857, settling in a small community of formerly enslaved people near Toronto. We were free, truly, legally, permanently free. No one could claim us as property. No one could drag us back to slavery. No one could separate us ever again. We made it, Lily said, standing beside me on our first day of freedom, looking out at the snow-covered landscape that was so different from the Florida swamps we'd left behind. We actually made it. You saved me, Finn. You saved all of us. I just used what I had. I said, my voice, my talent, my ability to create sounds, that's all I had to fight with. So that's what I used. It was enough. Lily said it was more than enough. You proved that even the most powerless person can fight back if they're clever enough, if they're brave enough, if they're willing to use whatever gifts they possess. I lived in Canada for the rest of my life, working various jobs, using my talent occasionally for entertainment, but never again for deception or escape. I married, had children, built a life in freedom that I'd never imagined possible when I was a slave boy performing for Master Thornton's guests. But I never forgot the Phantom Hunt, never forgot the night when I used my voice to create chaos and confusion, to draw away armed men while my sister and 11 others walked to freedom. And I never forgot the lesson I'd learned, that resistance takes many forms, that weapons can be found in unexpected places, that even the most unusual talent can be turned into a tool for liberation. The story of the Phantom Hunt continued to be told in the South, became part of the folklore of slavery and resistance. People would gather around fires and tell the tale of the night when ghost sounds drew slave catchers into the swamps, when fugitives vanished while their pursuers chased echoes, when the impossible became real, and sometimes when I was old and my children asked me about my life, about how I'd escaped slavery, about the stories they'd heard about the Phantom Hunt, I would tell them the truth. I would explain how I'd used my voice, how I'd created sounds that fooled experienced hunters, how I'd orchestrated an escape that seemed impossible, but that had actually been the result of careful planning and perfect execution. You were the Phantom Hunt. My son asked when I first told him, his eyes wide with amazement. You were the one who created those sounds. That was you. That was me, I confirmed. I was 14 years old. I had a talent for mimicking sounds, and I used that talent to free my sister and 11 other people. It was the most important thing I ever did. The moment when I stopped being just entertainment and became something more. A liberator, a trickster, a person who fought back against slavery using the only weapon I had. Tell me everything, my son said. Tell me exactly how you did it. Every detail, every sound you made. I want to know the whole story. And I told him about the months of preparation, about studying Silas Crow's voice, about practicing in the swamps, about the foggy night when everything came together. I told him about creating the sounds of a hunt that didn't exist, about drawing away the armed men, about running through the night with Lily and the others, about reaching the safe house and beginning the journey to freedom. I told him because I wanted him to understand that resistance is possible, that even the most powerless person can fight back, that creativity and intelligence can be as powerful as physical strength or weapons. And I told him because I wanted the truth to be preserved, wanted someone to know that the Phantom Hunt wasn't supernatural or magical, but was actually the work of one boy who'd used his gift wisely, who turned entertainment into liberation, who proven that sound could be a weapon as powerful as any gun or knife. I died in 1889 at the age of 46, having lived 32 years in freedom, more than twice as long as I'd lived in slavery. And when my children told my story, when they passed it on to their children, they told the truth that Phantom Hunt had been real, that it had been orchestrated by a 14-year-old slave boy with an extraordinary talent, that it had freed 13 people and created a legend that would inspire generations. The Echo Boy had used his voice to create freedom, and that was the greatest performance of his life. This was the story of Finn, a slave boy born in 1843 on the Thornton Sugar Plantation in Florida, who possessed the extraordinary ability to perfectly mimic any sound he heard. His talent was discovered when he was 9 years old, and he was made to perform for plantation guests as entertainment, earning him the nickname the Echo Boy. When his 18-year-old sister Lily was sold to the neighboring Harrison Plantation in 1857, 14-year-old Finn devised an audacious plan to free her. He spent months studying the voices of slave catchers, particularly a hunter named Silas Crow, and practicing creating the sounds of a slave hunt. On a foggy night in October 1857, Finn positioned himself in the woods between the two plantations and used his voice to create a phantom hunt, imitating Silas's voice giving commands, creating the sounds of gunshots and dogs, making it seem like a large group of fugitives was being pursued through the woods. All the armed men from both plantations, along with the actual slave catchers, rushed into the woods to join what they thought was a real hunt. While they chased echoes and sounds that Finn created from different locations, he ran to the Harrison Plantation, freed Lily and 11 other enslaved people, and led them north toward a safe house on the Underground Railroad. When the pursuers realized they'd been tricked and began following the real fugitives, Finn created more false sounds to misdirect them. All 13 escapees reached freedom in Canada. Phantom Hunt of Harrison County became a legend in Florida, with people speculating it was caused by swamp spirits, voodoo magic, or abolitionist conspiracies, never suspecting that one 14-year-old boy with a unique talent had orchestrated the entire escape. Finn lived in Canada until his death in 1889. And before he died, he told his children the true story of how he'd used his voice as a weapon to free his sister and create one of the most audacious escapes in the history of American slavery. The echoes of Finn's extraordinary gift reverberate through time, a powerful reminder that resistance takes many forms, that weapons can be found in the most unexpected places, and that even the most unusual talent can become a tool for liberation when wielded with courage and intelligence. What plantation owners saw as harmless entertainment, a slave boy who could mimic sounds for their amusement, was actually an extraordinary ability that Finn would transform into the instrument of his sister's freedom. His genius lay not just in his vocal talent, but in his strategic thinking. He understood that sound could create reality, that people would believe what they heard, that he could manipulate perceptions and actions through carefully orchestrated acoustic deceptions. The phantom hunt he created was a masterpiece of misdirection, drawing every armed man from two plantations into the woods to chase sounds that existed only in the acoustic landscape he constructed. While real escape happened in the opposite direction, his ability to perfectly mimic Silas Crow's voice to reproduce the sounds of gunshots and dogs to create the entire soundscape of a slave hunt from multiple locations, simultaneously music, demonstrated a level of sophistication and planning that belied his 14 years. But perhaps most remarkable was his willingness to use his gift not for personal gain or safety, but to free others, to risk everything for his sister and for 11 people he barely knew, to prove that even a child with nothing but an unusual talent could strike a devastating blow against the system that enslaved him. The legend that grew around the phantom hunt, the speculation about swamp spirits and voodoo magic and abolitionist conspiracies, served to protect Finn and the other escapees. because the more supernatural the explanation seemed, the less likely anyone would suspect the simple truth that one boy with perfect vocal mimicry had orchestrated the entire escape. His story challenges us to recognize that resistance doesn't always look like violence or confrontation, that sometimes the most effective weapons are creativity, intelligence, and the strategic use of whatever gifts we possess. If these untold stories of creative resistance and extraordinary talents used for liberation resonate with you, join our community. Subscribe to Slave Revenge to uncover more hidden truths from the shadows of slavery. Stories of those who used unexpected abilities and weapons, who proved that even children could outsmart their oppressors, who demonstrated that liberation requires not just courage but creativity and strategic brilliance. Your support ensures these powerful narratives continue to inspire. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What does Finn's story teach us about using our unique abilities for resistance? How do we honor those who freed others through intelligence and creativity rather than violence? What would you have done in his position? Let us know which untold tale you'd like to hear.